Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that when Orson Pratt arrived as a missionary in Scotland in 1840, he climbed a hill called Arthur's Seat and prayed that he would baptize 200 people? Learn how Elder Pratt baptized 80 people after he and his companions preached in the streets every night, and sometimes as much as 7 times on Sunday. Learn that Elder Pratt wrote a 31-page pamphlet called Remarkable Visions to help teach people about the gospel, and that by 1848, there were 70 branches of the church across Scotland.
Picture the scene. It's May of 1840. And imagine you are standing at the very top of Arthur's Seat.
Oh, yeah. Such an intense location.
Right. If you've never made the climb, it is this incredibly dramatic, windswept volcanic rock formation that just looms over the entire city of Edinburgh in Scotland.
And you get that wind whipping right off the Firth of Forth.
Exactly. The air is thick with the smoke of 19th century industry down below, and the ground you're standing on is steeped in all this ancient history. But kneeling right there on those craggy rocks is a 28-year-old American man named Orson Pratt.
Looking out over the whole Scottish coast.
Yeah, and he is making a highly specific request to the Lord. He doesn't ask for generic success, he doesn't ask for a safe passage back across the Atlantic. He asks for exactly 200 people in Scotland to baptize.
Which is such a wild detail. The specificity of that request is really what anchors his entire history. I mean, he isn't hoping for a movement. He's essentially demanding a quota from heaven.
A literal quota. And so the mission for our deep dive today is to explore how that single solitary moment of determination on a mountaintop, fueled by just relentless physical grit and a brilliant stroke of early mass communication, dramatically altered the religious landscape of Great Britain.
It really did change everything over there.
It did. Now, as we navigate this source material, I want to be clear that we are treating all the accounts here as absolute historical facts.
Right, the divine visions, the specific numbers of converts, the miraculous events.
All of it. Even the eventual renaming of that very landmark to Pratt's Hill by the local Scottish converts. We are looking at this history exactly as it unfolded. But to really understand the sheer gravity of setting a goal of 200 souls in a foreign country, we have to, look at who Orson Pratt actually was when he walked into Edinburgh.
Yeah, because if you look at the timeline, the British mission, which encompassed England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, had only just opened in 1837.
But it's still brand new.
Completely brand new. By 1840, the mission headquarters were established down in Manchester, England. And into this massive, completely unplowed field steps Orson Pratt.
And he's already got quite the resume by this point, right?
Oh, absolutely. He was born in Hartford, New York in 1811. He's the younger brother of Parley P. Pratt, who listeners will know as another prominent figure in the early church. Orson was actually baptized on his 19th birthday.
Okay, wow. Happy birthday to him.
Right. But the detail in the sources that really requires you to pause is this. By 1835, at the incredibly young age of 23, he was called to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
Wait, let's pause on that. The Quorum of the 12 Apostles is the highest governing body of this global church.
The top tier.
So at 23 years old, he is essentially tapped to be a foundational leader of a brand new religious movement. I mean, most 23-year-olds today are just trying to figure out how to navigate their first apartment lease.
Yeah, they're barely paying their own phone bill.
Exactly. And he's carrying the weight of a global rollout.
It speaks to the extreme youth of the movement at the time, sure, but also to his immense intellectual capacity. He was an extraordinarily diligent student.
And he works fast.
He really does. When he's assigned to labor in Edinburgh, he hits the ground running. He actually manages to organize the first Scottish branch of the church in Paisley, converting 80 members right out of the gate.
That's a huge win to start with.
It is. But by the summer of 1840, he hits a severe bottleneck. The sheer scale of the geographical work is just overwhelming him.
He's basically just one guy covering the whole country.
Pretty much. So he brings him back up. 2 other missionaries, Hiram Clark and Reuben Hedlock, who had actually been opening the work over in Belfast, Ireland.
And the ground game they are executing together is staggering. I was reading this in the sources, and they were preaching nightly on the streets.
Every single night.
And then on the Sabbath, they were preaching 7 times a day.
7 separate sermons.
In one day. The physical realities of that are brutal. Think about it. You are in 1840s Britain. You have no microphone.
No PA system at all.
Right. You are dealing with rain, terrible cobblestone acoustics, hecklers, and just the competing noise of a massive industrial city.
It's like doing 7 back-to-back outdoor keynote presentations in a single day, week after week.
Yes. You are just projecting your voice across a public square until your vocal cords give out.
It is an auditory and physical marathon, and the psychological toll is just as heavy. Orson Pratt recorded that he found it almost impossible to awaken the attention of the people, just to get them to stop walking and listen.
So he's pouring his absolute soul out, but the return on investment is painfully low.
Painfully low.
I'm looking at these records and wondering about the breaking point. With all his physical exhaustion, all this shouting into the Scottish weather, it seems like he was just burning himself out.
It definitely looks like burnout.
Right. Like, was he actually gaining traction, or was this just the momentum of a desperate man trying to hit a numerical goal of 200?
Well, he was desperately seeking a wedge to break through the apathy. And that wedge finally presents itself in the form of a grueling 2-evening live debate with a Wesleyan Methodist preacher.
Oh, wow. 2 whole evenings.
Yeah. And this wasn't a casual conversation over tea. This was highly structured, deeply intense theological combat. The Methodist preacher challenged him, and Pratt took the stage.
And did it work?
It did. The mechanism of this debate is what finally works. It proves to be the means of convincing many locals of the ancient gospel, and they actually come forth and are baptized.
See, that makes total sense for the era. A 2-day live theological debate in the 1840s was prime entertainment.
Oh, it was the main event in town.
It was high stakes, high drama. People flocked to public intellectual combat back then. But here is the massive structural problem I see with that strategy.
It doesn't scale.
Exactly. It does not scale. If you are Orson Pratt and your vocal cords are already shredded from 7 sermons a Sunday, you cannot debate every single Methodist preacher in Scotland individually.
You'll be dead in a month.
Right. You are strictly limited by your own biology and the clock.
Which is exactly the realization that forces a total pivot for him. The exhaustion of street preaching, combined with the unscalable nature of live debate, required a totally new strategy if he was going to hit that goal of 200 souls.
So what does he do?
Well, he prayed for another way. And in the fall of 1840, he received divine inspiration to shift his medium entirely. He sat down and wrote a 31-page pamphlet.
Okay, so the title of this text is quite the mouthful. It's called An Interesting Account of Several Remarkable Visions and the Late Discovery of Ancient American Records.
Very catchy for the 1840s.
Right, very punchy. But I have to push back on this strategy for a moment.
Okay, lay it on me.
If you look at the historical context, 1840s Great Britain was absolutely flooded with penny tracts and religious pamphlets. It was the cheapest form of mass media.
Everyone had a pamphlet.
Literally every denomination, every political movement was handing them out on the street corners. Why would retreating to a 31-page written booklet actually cut through the noise?
It's a fair question.
Because if a highly charged live debate is what finally captured the public's imagination, why did this specific pamphlet work instead of just becoming more paper blowing down the streets of Edinburgh?
Because this pamphlet wasn't just another philosophical argument. It was basically a theological skeleton key.
A skeleton key? How so?
Well, Pratt didn't just write a generic summary of belief. He codified the exact message that had been winning those street debates into an easily distributable format. The structure of the pamphlet was genius in its simplicity.
Break it down for me.
It was broken into 2 distinct parts. The first part recounted the prophet Joseph Smith's vision of the Father and the Son alongside the history of the Book of Mormon.
Okay, so giving people the narrative, the origin story.
Yes. And then the second part was a sketch of the faith and doctrine of the church. It laid out the actual mechanics of the religion.
Like the rules and the structure.
Right. And crucially, it included the restoration of the priesthood, which is a vital concept here. Pratt was explaining that this wasn't just a new interpretation of the Bible like so many other sects were offering at the time.
It was a literal return of divine authority.
Exactly. To act in God's name, to baptize, and to lead. For a 19th century working-class Scottish audience who were deeply familiar with the Bible, but feeling totally disconnected from the established state churches, this specific articulation of restored ancient Christianity hit a massive nerve.
So it's like a modern-day viral white paper. The pamphlet acts as a surrogate missionary.
That's a great way to put it.
It doesn't get tired. It doesn't lose its voice. It can be sitting on a table in 100 different pubs and living rooms at the exact same time, doing the heavy theological lifting while Orson Pratt is at home sleeping.
It provided physical infrastructure for the ideas, and the virality of it was unprecedented for the era. It was printed 3 separate times across the United States, Europe, and Australia.
Wow, Australia too.
Yeah, it went everywhere. It was eventually translated into German, French, Danish, Swedish, and Dutch.
But the validation loop of this text is what fascinates me the most. We are talking about a street preacher getting rained on in Edinburgh who sits down to write a summary of his faith just to save his voice.
Born out of sheer necessity.
Right. But his writing is so definitive and so historically and theologically precise that the founder of the church himself, Joseph Smith, actually utilizes Pratt's pamphlet.
Oh, he lifts it almost directly.
Yeah. Joseph Smith quotes it extensively in his incredibly famous 1842 letter to John Wentworth, the editor of the Chicago Democrat.
And the Wentworth letter is arguably one of the most important historical documents in the church's history. I mean, it outlines the core articles of faith.
And a massive chunk of its theological summary is pulled directly from the intellectual labor of Orson Pratt.
It is an amazing dynamic. The man who actually experienced the divine visions used his students' work as the definitive reference material to explain those visions to the rest of the world.
A booklet written in a tiny Scottish apartment becomes the foundational document that flourishes for 2 decades.
And we know Pratt's text was perfectly accurate to the original events because he stated it publicly. Years later, during an 1859 sermon, Pratt confirmed the absolute accuracy of what he had written in remarkable visions.
What did he say?
He told the congregation, "I will give you a brief history as it came from his own mouth. I have often heard him relate it."
Ah, so Pratt had heard the account of the first vision directly from Joseph Smith numerous times.
Exactly. He was acting as the perfect conduit, translating that oral history into a medium that could cross oceans.
Which pulls us right back to the craggy peak of Arthur's Seat, because this strategic shift to print directly allowed Pratt to achieve that highly specific mountaintop request.
It really did. Pratt flooded the streets of Edinburgh with his newly minted pamphlet, and on March 30th, 1841, as he was preparing to leave Scotland and return to North America, he tallied the results.
The moment of truth.
Yeah. He wrote an account published in the Millennial Star, which was essentially the primary news organ and communication hub for the church in Britain at the time.
Okay.
And he stated that he was leaving upwards of 200 disciples under the watch care of a faithful convert named George D. Watt.
Exactly 200. The dedicatory prayer is realized. He hits the number.
Right on the dot.
And he hands the reins to George D. Watt, a convert from Preston, England. But looking at the broader timeline in the sources, those 200 people were just the ignition point of a much, much larger shockwave.
Oh, it didn't stop there. The foundation Pratt built in Scotland, utilizing the scalable power of his pamphlet, sparked an era of exponential growth.
Give me the numbers.
By 1848, a mere 7 years after Pratt left, there were 70 fully organized branches stretching all the way from Glasgow down to Edinburgh.
That is massive growth for 7 years.
And we aren't just talking about a few individuals here and there. We are talking about nearly entire villages converting and joining the church.
Entire villages shifting their religious allegiance en masse. And the demographics get even more staggering from there. The source material shows that from 1840 to 1920, the foundation laid by Pratt and others resulted in over 50,000 British converts migrating to North America.
50,000
How does that even happen?
Well, it is one of the most significant, highly organized demographic shifts in religious history. And to understand the mechanism behind it, we have to look at the specific theology Pratt was teaching in that pamphlet.
Right. It wasn't just believe in this and you'll go to heaven.
No. The message wasn't just about personal, internal salvation. It was a massive call to action based on a specific revelation. The early church operated under a book of modern revelations known as the Doctrine and Covenants.
Right.
And section 39, verse 13, explicitly commanded the believers to physically gather together to bring forth Zion.
Meaning Zion wasn't just some nice metaphor for a state of mind. It was a physical city being built in the American West, and the believers were under divine mandate to physically relocate there.
Precisely. Pratt's pamphlet provided the intellectual proof they needed to accept this new theology. But once they accepted the theology, the migration wasn't optional. He gave them a new geographic destiny.
The logistics of this are mind-bending.
They really are. You have thousands of working-class families pulling up their ancestral roots, traveling to the Liverpool docks, enduring weeks in the steerage holds of sailing ships across the Atlantic to New Orleans or New York.
And then literally walking across the American plains.
Exactly.
The return on investment of Pratt's time in Scotland is almost impossible to quantify. Like a single year of exhausting street preaching, a pivot to a 31-page booklet, and it directly translates to tens of thousands of people moving across the globe.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
But what is truly wild to me is that for Orson Pratt, this grueling Scottish mission wasn't the capstone of his career. It was barely the prologue.
Oh, yeah. If we zoom out on Orson Pratt's timeline, the Scottish mission is just a microcosm of his entire existence.
Just a drop in the bucket.
Completely. His life was defined by nonstop, relentless service to the expansion of this work. We discussed the huge success of Remarkable Visions, but over his lifetime, he authored more than 15 major works during the 19th century that introduced the gospel to hundreds of thousands.
And his physical travel itinerary, I am looking at the geographical spread in the sources, and the sheer logistics of it are exhausting just to read out loud.
Don't stop.
From the time he was baptized in 1830 until 1879, he was almost never home. Listen to this. He crisscrosses New York, Missouri, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois.
And then he travels up and down the eastern states. We're talking Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine.
Yeah, he pushes north into Canada, establishing branches in Toronto and Brantford.
And remember, that is strictly the North American continent. He returns to Great Britain multiple times. He completes a mission in Washington, D.C.
He pioneers the missionary work in Austria, traveling deeply into broader Europe.
He finally passed away on October 3rd, 1881, at the age of 70, meaning he spent almost every single year from his 19th birthday until his death on the road.
Just imagine the structural necessity behind that constant movement. A brand new global religion needs constant apostolic presence to maintain unity, to prevent splintering, and, to keep the massive logistical migration of converts flowing smoothly.
A huge operation.
And he's doing this in the 1800s. No commercial flights, no interstate highways. He is surviving by relying entirely on the network of converts he is building, traveling by foot, by horse-drawn carriage, and by weeks-long ship voyages.
The physical stamina required to sustain that level of movement, while constantly writing, debating, and leading congregations in multiple languages and cultures, is monumental.
It has to be driven by something deep.
It requires a profound, absolute certainty in the truth of what you are sharing. That kind of endurance simply cannot be sustained by casual belief.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of this journey. We started with a young man kneeling on a rocky hill in Scotland, utterly exhausted, asking heaven for exactly 200 souls.
And we saw him struggle to be heard over the noise of the cobblestone streets.
Right. We saw him hit a wall and realized that simply working harder, simply shouting louder into the wind was no longer viable.
And that pivot to writing Remarkable Visions changed the trajectory of the entire mission.
It codified his voice.
Exactly. It solved the scalability problem and allowed the truth to reach far beyond the limits of his own physical endurance.
It hit the immediate goal of 200 baptisms, but far more importantly, it laid the intellectual and spiritual groundwork for a 50,000-person migration that would physically build Zion in North America.
A total game changer.
So think about your own challenges in light of this. Consider your own Arthur's Seat moments. When you are facing a goal that seems completely impossible given the tools you are currently using, the breakthrough rarely comes from just grinding harder.
Grinding only gets you so far.
The breakthrough requires a total shift in strategy. It requires finding your own version of a 31-page pamphlet to scale your impact.
It is a phenomenal blueprint for problem solving. But leaving the strategy aside for a second, this history also presents a really fascinating cultural echo to linger on.
What do you mean?
Well, we documented the 50,000 British and Scottish converts who pulled up their roots and migrated to North America. But consider the cultural vacuum left behind over there.
Oh, interesting.
What happened to the identity of those abandoned villages in Scotland when entire populations suddenly just packed up and left?
That is a fascinating angle. I hadn't even considered the void they created back home.
And look at the receiving end of that migration, too. How much of the modern cultural fabric of the North American pioneer settlements, the folklore, was secretly permanently shaped by the people Orson Pratt first debated on the cobblestone streets of Edinburgh?
It's all connected.
The history and the physical settlements of the American West are, in many profound ways, written with a Scottish accent.
What an incredible thought to end on. From a highly specific, solitary prayer in the windswept rocks overlooking the Firth of Forth to the bustling, foundational pioneer settlements of the American West, the historical echo of that one moment on Arthur's Seat just keeps ringing.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.